What if I told you the 2022 World Cup wasn't really won on a bid presentation? What if the real deal happened over lunch, in a private room, months before the vote, and had nothing to do with stadiums, fan zones, or football at all? This is the story of how a tiny, football-irrelevant country ended up hosting the biggest tournament on Earth, and the trail of jets, investments, and political favors that followed right behind it. Let's set the scene. It's 2010. FIFA is about to decide who hosts the 2022 World Cup. On paper, Qatar shouldn't have had a real shot. Brutal summer heat that would later force organizers to move the entire tournament to winter. No real football infrastructure. A domestic league nobody outside the region watched. FIFA's own technical evaluation, the report meant to grade bids on actual readiness, rated Qatar's bid as high risk in multiple categories. Not borderline, high risk. And yet, when the votes were counted, Qatar didn't just win, it beat out the United States in the final round. A country with virtually no football culture beat the country with the most developed football infrastructure on the planet. FIFA's own executive committee had the technical report in front of them. They voted the other way anyway, so the obvious question is, why? And the answer, if you follow the money and the paper trail, has almost nothing to do with football. Here's where it gets interesting. A few months before that vote, the president of France at the time hosted a private lunch at the Élysée Palace. In the room, the emir of Qatar and the president of UEFA, the man who controlled one of the most powerful voting blocs inside FIFA. Officially, nobody has ever confirmed exactly what was discussed, but here's what we do know happened right around that meeting and right after it. That UEFA president, who had reportedly been leaning toward voting for the United States, switched his vote to Qatar. That's not speculation. He later confirmed publicly that he changed his position before the final vote. One vote in a room of about 20 people, in a race that came down to a handful of votes total. That single switch may have been enough to change the outcome of the entire tournament. Now here's the part where it stops looking like football politics and starts looking like something else entirely. Weeks after Qatar was awarded the World Cup, the French national airline manufacturer signed a massive aircraft deal with Qatar Airways, dozens of jets, worth billions of dollars. Around the same period, Qatar's state investment fund made a move that shocked the football world. It bought a French football club outright. Not just any club, a club based in the same city as the government that had hosted that private lunch. Within a few years, that club had turned into one of the best-funded teams on the planet, backed by Qatari state money, chasing the biggest names in the sport. On top of that, Qatar's investment arm expanded aggressively into French real estate, French luxury assets, and French infrastructure projects. Suddenly, a country with no football pedigree wasn't just hosting a World Cup. It was deeply financially entangled with the very country whose football official had helped swing the vote in its favor. Coincidence? Maybe. Corporations sign deals with each other all the time, and countries invest in each other's economies constantly. That's the official line, and it's the one everyone involved has stuck to. Nobody has ever been convicted of trading a World Cup vote for a plain order and a football club purchase. But investigators in more than one country didn't buy the coincidence explanation either. French prosecutors opened a corruption investigation, specifically examining whether that Élysée lunch was where the real deal got made. FIFA's own internal ethics investigation, led by an American attorney brought in specifically to dig into the 2018 and 2022 bidding process, produced a report so damaging that FIFA refused to release it publicly. When a summary finally leaked, the investigator himself said publicly that it didn't accurately reflect his findings. Think about that for a second. FIFA's own hired investigator said FIFA's own summary of his own report was misleading. So why does this matter beyond one lunch and one vote? Because this is how modern World Cup hosting actually works. It's not really a football competition. It's a bidding war where football readiness is almost a side conversation. The real currency is diplomatic leverage, infrastructure investment, energy deals, and soft power. Qatar didn't need a great football league. It needed one very well-placed vote, and it needed to make that vote worth switching. And Qatar isn't even hiding what hosting the World Cup was for. Football was never really the point. The tournament was a soft power operation, a multi-billion-dollar rebrand designed to put a small Gulf state that most Americans couldn't find on a map onto the biggest stage in global sports and keep it there permanently. Every stadium, every hotel, every global broadcast during that tournament was, functionally, a commercial for the country itself. And by the time the trophy was lifted, that goal had basically already been achieved regardless of the football. Here's the uncomfortable pattern once you zoom out. Hosting rights for FIFA have repeatedly gone to bids that made the most sense politically and economically for a small number of very powerful voters, not the bids that made the most sense for the sport. The technical evaluation exists so FIFA can say due diligence happened. But when the vote doesn't match the evaluation, that tells you the evaluation was never really the deciding factor to begin with. And once you see it in the Qatar case, you start noticing the shape of it everywhere. Hosting bids that come bundled with broadcast rights deals. Hosting bids that come bundled with airline partnerships. Hosting bids that come bundled with construction contracts for firms tied to voting countries. The World Cup host announcement is the headline. The actual deal usually gets signed somewhere nobody's filming, so the next time a country gets awarded a World Cup and pundits scratch their heads because it doesn't make sense for football, remember, it was never supposed to make sense for football. It made sense for someone. You just have to follow the planes, the property, and the private lunches to find out who. If you want me to dig into the next hosting decision that got buried the same way, tell me which one in the comments, and I'll break it down next.